I'm Gil Aguilera. I was born here in the homeland of the Chiricahua Apaches in the Mimbres Basin and Range. I enlisted in the service, the U.S. Navy in 2 days after my high school graduation. I enlisted in the Navy in a special recruiting program, and I served from 1961 active to 65, but my reserve ended in 1967, actually. I was born and raised in this area all my life. I was born during World War II when my father and most of the people in Deming, New Mexico were either in Europe fighting the Nazis or they were in the Philippines fighting the Japanese. I'm a Navy veteran, as my brother is. We both served together. He was a couple of years younger than me. And we're connected to this sacred site because of the Fort Beard historical site, sacred site, and the National Cemetery there. My story about growing up in this area is about colors. It's about color, the differences, slight differences, and religion. This is a horse culture area here, mining, and the forestry. The big one of the first and biggest national forest is here where we are now. And I presently live in the middle of it. But in Deming, New Mexico during World War II, color kind of depended where you lived and how you existed in those days. My mother lived in the same block as a Catholic church. Very light-skinned people, different. I was aware of this very, very young. And then my Bronco Apache Native family was across the road going to Mexico. It was just a block away. And they lived a couple of miles into the mesquites. And that was our Bronco Apache rancheria. And that's what we called, not barrio, not colonia, but they were called a rancheria. And my whole family lived there. I knew the difference since my first incident that I remember that I got in trouble was at 3 years old. I left my mother's home on Ruby Street next to the Catholic Church, and I walked a couple of miles into the mesquite to my grandfather's home, picked up his dog, and then I went to his daughter's house, which was a little further into the mesquite area, and where my cousins all lived. And she looked out the window and saw me with the dogs, playing with the dogs in her yard. My mother, alarmed, figured out what I had done, and she followed my footsteps in the sand. And she saw where I went and picked up the dog and then followed me a little further. And she was so relieved that she found me. And she took me back to her mother's house on Ruby Street. And my mother did not punish me, but my grandmother took a wet hand to my bottom, and I got it good. And I tell this story because World War II was going on. My father was in the U.S. Army. He'd been in the National Guard. And he was stationed at Fort Bliss. He was in the armored divisions fighting in Germany. And then well, France and Germany. My uncle Avi, my mother's brother, was a little different. He finished school. He was an incredible athlete. My father also was an incredible athlete, runner, baseball. My uncle Avi also. And being in that culture, everybody at that time, because of the wars that fought along the border, the Pancho Villa incident at the border, but we also had all the troops of the Army and the cavalry living right outside of Deming, between here and Deming. And all the men, it was like, especially the Aguileras, but the people from these areas, being a horse culture and farmers and ranchers, everybody joined the National Guard and wanted to be in the cavalry units at that time. Where my mother's house was in Deming, it was the church, and then a block away was the old fort. And the adobe walls are still there. So it was an incredible time, because a few miles into the Mesquite was the Deming Airport, where the bombing squadrons, the first bombing squadrons, went to train, and they were the bombers were being returned, were repaired also in that area. A lot of the people, a lot of the men, my dad's friends, relatives, most of them, it's a sad story, but they went to fight in the Philippines, and they came back. The lucky ones that came back were all participated in the Bataan Death March. My dad's family, all his cousins, Manuel Rodriguez, his first cousin, being rank and file, his body was never found, and he was just declared. It was an incident. Living next to the church and people praying every day. I mean, the church was packed. And I was, born in 1942, I was a young little baby. And my mother said, "It's a wonder I ever learned to walk." And she says, "Why?" I asked her, "Why?" And she says, all the women that had their husbands fighting in the war, all the women that lost their husbands, found comfort in me, because, of course, my mother and my grandmother had me at the church. Mostly my grandmother and aunts were close by the church. Deming is a very close community. I mean, friendly people that live. The only difference that already there were differences in my relatives by the church and my Chihene people living out in the area.
Can you explain more about these differences?
That's where I'm going. And I always remember, going back, is the difference in color of the people that lived by the church and those that lived in the Mesquite, in the rancherias array. And it seems like I was related to everybody. Adobe homes, washrooms, they had wells. God, we had wells in Deming all the time. Good water, it wasn't difficult. They had wash stations outside, and the women were always outside by the wash station, cleaning, doing that. My mother and all the eligible people, my mother and my dad were good English-speaking people. In the rancherias, they didn't get much past the seventh grade because they had to work in the ranches and the fields. And their English was marginal, let's put it that way. And, but I felt, and my grandfather was there, so my grandfather and the older people in Deming particularly raised me. And, but I felt more comfortable in the mesquites than I did along the church. And I still, to this day, find it. But what impacted me the most is that my family on my dad's side, on the Native American side, on the Bronco side, went in the U.S. Army. They had very little education, if any. On the Hispanic side of my mother's family, they all finished high school. And lighter skin. And like I said, in our family, they're incredible athletes. Good, even that runners, baseball players, football players, leather helmets. We still have that. So at the end of the war, like I said, the rank and file, they left the bodies where they lay. And the men came back, many. The worst condition of the men are the ones that were in the Japanese prison camps in the Philippines. The seriousness. I've experienced, when the men came back, the post-traumatic syndrome. I saw these men crawl into the bottle, the alcohol, the nightmares, my father waking up in nightmares at night. It took him years to learn to sit down on a chair again. And he thought he was still in his tank. It was a very traumatic thing. But by that time, they had pretty much discharged him. He had always been, like I said, most of the men had enlisted in the National Guard, and then, of course, they were taken right into the war. But there was, what I always remember living in that home, there was always two duffel bags. One for the military for my dad, and the other one was for the baseball equipment. And everybody knew everybody in that place. We were all related, I think. But it was a beautiful, warm feeling. I remember being at the feet of all these old men and hearing incredible stories of Pancho Villa War, the Apache Wars, and our relatives, the Bronco Apaches out of the Sierra Madres and Janos, Mexico would come and make visits for supplies, and some were still riding wagons into New Mexico and going back. It's only 30 miles to the border. And so I have always had very close contact with both sides of the border, with my native side, with the Spanish side. But after the war, my father and most of the men living that didn't have the education could not find employment. The railroad through Deming was very important to the Army for big activities, carrying material for the military, the cattle, especially that came out of the Mimbres area and the Gila Mountains. But the lucky ones would get labor jobs within the railroad, and that was about as good as it got. My dad came back and could not find employment in Deming. He was lucky they would let him shop in some of the stores downtown Deming at that time because of the segregation and racism that still was going on. We've experienced this all my life, even then. it wasn't a frightening experience. You just had to know where to be and where to stand. And you knew immediately the rules of engagement, I call it. And so I grew up feeling with this.
So can you expound a little bit more about the racism that you experience? I know you have given some instances, but can you expound a bit more as far as the racism that you experienced growing up? And then what were the things that you were doing to stop or combat that?
I'm leading to that. Okay. The difficulty, again, of the men coming back from war, and don't, and you can never understand that after the government, I mean, after our people lost the land to the agreement between the Mexican and American government, the Gaston Purchase, they were displaced. There was poverty and the Depression. And they were lucky. Existing and getting food on the table was extremely difficult. And my father had to come north to Silver City, which we have, it's only 40 miles away. And my father said that, and my grandfather in those days we have, of course, our Chihene, Bronco relatives were all through the Gila and especially the Mimbres Valley and on into Arizona. So they visited in wagons. My grandfather and my grandmother rode, my dad also, and I often asked him, "Oh, what would you do?" And he said he ran along with a pony, the colt, and he would move rocks that would get in the way of the wagon. But they walked, it was a 2-day trip to make 40 miles. And they always stopped at one of our favorite gatherings, a very sacred gathering, now called City of Rocks. The Mimbres Valley in this particular area that I'm talking about, this 40, is some of the most sacred water there is. In Deming, there was a big sign, now we remember, best water in the world. And the big sign next to the tank, next to what is now I-10, and the railroad. The railroad was big. I mean, it was big business. And, but there, it is now a desert. But when I was there, it was the most beautiful springs, cottonwoods, water running everywhere. Nothing like what it, antelope by the hundreds. And in my lifetime, due to the misuse, I think there's 30 wells now to supply the mining operations and the ranching for irrigation. And but the cattle ranchers, the Texas cattle ranchers that came in, controlled all of that. And but at least in my lifetime, I got to see, what it was when it was Apache and the members, the Membreño culture, how beautiful it was, and why it was such a rich culture. The thing started, again, changed for us because of my parents and our relatives being veterans. The people with the education, my Uncle Avi, his wife, went immediately into the Las Cruces, New Mexico, University at Las Cruces. And my father, like I said, had very great difficulty because he lacked the education. But my Uncle Avi, being an athlete, having good grades, and his And he graduated as a mechanical engineer and became one of the top missile engineers in Colorado. And from Colorado, he moved to Downey and worked with NASA in space, the space shuttle and the pad. My uncle Avi mentored all his nephews, myself, Danny O'Dean, Manny, and our other cousins. And he advised us, but he was always there. He had a better life. One thing that held the family together was our sacred gatherings for the church. The holidays were respected highly. But one thing that we did, we had incredible gatherings in the Gila Wilderness and the Members Mountains and so forth. Beautiful times, and we really enjoyed that. The men also set up some of the biggest hunting camps I have participated in. Some of them, and again, they were all veterans from Japan, Philippines, and we would set up camps. Sometimes there were 48 people in them. The young boys like myself, we were already, we were shooting and hunting by 4 or 5 years old. I had a BB gun, and my father being in the military, believe it or not, we were one of the first people that had insurance, dental and medical insurance. And they took out my wisdom tooth when I was 5 or something like that. Somehow this dentist talked my mother in that. I don't even remember, but I was told later why. But it was a benefit. It was funny because most people couldn't even afford to go to the doctor. But being a veteran, you had incredible opportunities. My dad and my family did benefit, but my Uncle Avi, having the education and having the experience of being in the military, his exposure in being a radio man in submarine services, and his submarine was quite famous, and and he maintained that relationship. That's something about a veterans. You belong to the Veterans Association, you stay strong. But it was his influence later in life when we didn't know what we knew we didn't want to be a cowboy, and I sure didn't want to live work in the mines. The mines, the smelter, were some of the most racist organizations. The Salt of the Earth movie was filmed there when I was probably in the 4th, 5th grade. I was part of it. I was in school with a Union. Clinton Jenks came from back east, a beautiful wife and daughter. And his son was in my class, chubby white boy. And my God, the Mexican-American guys like to pick on him. So I ended up being his bodyguard. We lived close together, and I protected him all my life, and we were good friends. At that time, you remember, well, there were no cell phones. So the Union Hall was just a quarter mile from my house. And at that time, Grant County led the nation of consumption for liquor in the nation. This little mining community was out drinking the whole thing. So there were so many bars and liquor stores in Grant County, you cannot believe. And the people had stores everywhere. So the men, since we hung around the Union Hall, and I knew everybody, really, and I literally knew everybody. Oh, I was also the altar boy at the Catholic school. So I was kept busy. And but when the union leaders needed a special person, they would tell us what bar they were in and who. We knew who. And I think that's where I developed my agility and my stamina and speed. And I ran. I was the cell phone, and I would call and get that, and then the men would drive us back, usually with a pack of Fritos or potato chips. So I always had a purpose. So that was probably the greatest, my first experience in how the union worked and the anger that I had at that time against the union company of what they made my family and everybody there suffer. One strike lasted 3 years. And we had to move to Arizona to work in Hayden, Arizona. I didn't have a license. My father drove the car with my mom and my sister. And my brother and I and my Duke, my boxer dog, and my brother. But the boxer was over. And I drove the truck, the pickup truck full of furniture to Arizona without a driver's license. And Joe Chavita that just spoke earlier, when we came back, we had to live in the same house. Times were hard. It was very hard for my father. Tommy Foy, who later became the district attorney of our county, had been a prisoner in in the Philippine prisons under the Japanese. And my father bought a home in Hurley, New Mexico for $3,600, and Mr. Foy helped him finance the house. I was in the 7th grade at that time, and we were the first minority family to move into the Anglo side of town. 1957, something like that. I was in the 7th grade, and I thought the Anglos were going to kill me. I said, I won't survive the day, the week. And of course, moving from my friends and the beautiful places that I had just come from, I was feeling for myself sitting on the fence when 3 white guys came up, 3 cowboys, they had their hats, and I immediately panicked. And they said, aren't you that track star from Baird? And I said, yeah. And by that time I had a Pepsi bottle, and then I relaxed. And Mike Byington, Derry Blackman, and Richard McGee ended up being my best friends ever. Who gave me the hardest time were the Mexican-American guys from the other side of the town was divided by the railroad, and there was but they're the ones that, oh my God, it was, racism was, but how dare you move into that, you're too good for us. Anyway, it was quite an experience, but I've always had this great ability of running. You've got to be pretty goddamn fast to catch me. And I had an arm, and with rocks, I could plaster anybody with that. One story when we first moved to Deming and I say that because my friend just passed away about a month ago. And I was in the 2nd grade when they moved me to Hurley. From Deming, it got worse to Hurley. And I of course, lived on the wrong side of it wasn't they were the tracks. But I lived in the Mexican side of town, living with one of our relatives. But I was in the 2nd grade in the Mexican elementary school, and there was a light-skinned young boy sitting next to me. And that puzzled me to no end. Like I said, I'm very conscious of the darkness of the people that I was living with. And this boy didn't belong there. And I knew that, but it puzzled me for years. And, his mother was our teacher. Mrs. Byington was a Cherokee Choctaw Indian, enrolled Indian from Oklahoma. She got a job teaching on the Mexican side of town, and her son from Oklahoma, Cherokee Choctaw, was. Mike just passed some time back. My closest friend I've ever had. In our football team, I was a tailback, and he was a fullback. He was the biggest guy on our team. We grew very close. My mother should have claimed him as a dependent, and it was a beautiful time. At that time, we graduated in high school, living in this situation. Another family came in from Texas to work at the mine, and they were from Tyler, Texas. And Barry Hurt and his brother Jerry. Jerry was a little older. And Barry ended up being the quarterback of the high school team. And I was a tailback, and Mike Byington was a fullback. Barry Hurt and I were the co-captains of the football team in 1961. 7 of us, when we graduated, not Mike. Mike went to the university in eastern New Mexico, I believe. But Barry and I enlisted with these other, it was 6 of us men from Coburg, and Coburg High School. And one girl invited, Gloria Duran from Santa Clara. We call it Central at that time. She enlisted, and Barry Hurt and I went to boot camp together, and we served together for a year and a half. The best example of what happens when we're military brats, we were raised military. I don't think I've ever used the word no, sir. I think every word that ever came out of my mouth was yes, sir. And my posture, my stance, I was correct at every moment. And we, like I said, our bathing facilities, you started on the outside. They had an outdoor place where they sprayed you wash down before you could get into the shower in the main part of the house. And but Barry and I went in, and his background, he came from a ranching family. They're still cowboys. They're still rodeoing. And but Barry and I were always served together for whatever reason. And an officer, we were on watch, and an officer came and gave us instructions. And I said, yes, sir. And then he looked at Barry and he says, okie dokie. He responded, okie dokie, to a military officer. And I've never seen somebody do so many push-ups in my life. My father had all, and I say this because Barry and I, after we went to school to ACE, our electronics, our ACE schools, he was a mechanic, I was electronics in Memphis, Tennessee. But his background was different. When I came out of boot camp, I was already in the color guard. I was already wearing braids. I was a platoon leader. The training my father did, I qualified with the M1 immediately. I had no problems with that. And in fact, they used me to help carry ammunitions over. But all the way I was raised by my father and everybody else, I was very well prepared. Military boot camp was very simple for me. And by the time we got we went to a naval aviation special training school out in Millington, Tennessee. That was quite, my whole world really changed at that time to a different, because Barry and I and we were all 6 total Navy guys in uniform, got in the bus in Deming. When we got to El Paso, all of us were harassed by the Border Patrolmen. In uniform, they made us pull out our identification cards.
What year was this?
1961. 18 years old, and we get, I mean, you've gone through this all your life in New Mexico. You think sometime, but that was only the beginning. When the bus approached Dallas, somehow I went through what ended up calling the Texas Mason-Dixon line. We got into the bus station in Texas, and I needed to go to the bathroom bad. One bathroom said whites only, the other one said blacks. And I kept looking around, and I was squirming. I mean, I was really confused. There was no other. I mean, and finally somebody took me by my arm, and he led me to the white section. And he was a very light-skinned black gentleman. And I say that in a good way because he was beautiful. He was a good person. And he was smiling at me, he knew. And he said, "Son, this is where you go." And I looked, and it said white. And are you sure? I didn't want to get into any more trouble than it was. And that was my beginning. And then to living in Memphis, Tennessee during the Black Freedom Days, it was an experience and a half. And of course, I got to meet my first Yankees, my first New Yorkers, and my first beautiful friend from Queens, New York. And like idiots, McClendon was from Queens, New York. Light skin, green eyes, came from a very nice family. And he had a 57 Ford white convertible. And as soon as we were able to get out, our first Liberty, he said, "Let's go to Ole Miss University to see the football game." So we jumped into his convertible, and he's driving. And about 60 miles into Mississippi, we pulled into a little gas station, a little town, and he tells the gas owner, "Fill her up." And I don't know how they didn't kill him. I mean, it was serious business. And we did everything we could to get out of that town. And I mean, they were after him. That was my first experience at 18. And we drove out of town. We discussed what had happened. I got in the driver's seat, and we put him in the back and he covered himself with a big coat. And I went to the next town, and I got that car filled up, and we turned around and went back to the base. McClendon next week had a big map of the United States, and he had a big marker, and he marked the South all the way to El Paso, Texas, and he blocked it all.
Did he ever mention a green book?
Huh?
Did he ever mention the green book?
The what?
Green Book.
Green book?
Yeah, where black people could stay based on.
It was a travel
Oh,
guide.
we didn't even know about any
It
of
was
that.
black people wrote guides where you could
No, we didn't.
hotels,
No,
restaurants.
I mean, we were just boost.
Yeah, it
What-
would have been something he learned from his parents.
Yeah, no. But McClendon and I ended up serving together for years. We got the same duty and everything. Again, like I said, when I got boot camp, I was already officer, petty officer. They're evaluating, but you don't know, they've been evaluating all the way. And when I got to Memphis, Tennessee, it takes a while to get situated. And I was right away sent to color guard school and duty driving before I started my electronic school. And this is what I did. I became an executive, a driver for the top brass, and that's how I did. And what you do, when you're that, the first thing I did, and I had the money, I went and bought my custom dress, and that's what you use. And you get to wear the gold braid,
Epaulets.
and there's a purpose for all of that. You don't have to wait in line when you have a braid on. You just walk up to the front and go in, and you have a special place for it. Yeah. All of this, I had already been awarded. But the other thing that helped me tremendously was being an athlete. It helped me in boot camp. The friends that I met while I was the petty officer for the athletic activities, important. One from San Antonio, Texas, one from Brownsville, one from the Hawaiian Islands. And we always stayed together. And the strangest stories have occurred later regarding this event. But I did my duty, but in Barry Hurd, my best friend, of course, is serving there. He's a mechanic, I'm an auxiliary school, so we pulled a lot of duty together. We never did, well, he never went back to Mississippi, especially McClendon, but I had very good friends in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Warrior, Alabama, so I got to see the South on that particular end. The other incident that was that we were still 18 years old is that the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred when I was 18. And Barry Hurd and I were doing duty together, and these crazy military people gave us loaded M1s to guard an air base.
Which air base?
Huh?
Which air base?
No, somewhere, who knows, yeah, you're limited as to where you're gonna go, but it was there in Millington. And I remember Barry saying he was happy with that. And I kept saying, these people gotta be loaded to giving loaded M1s to two 18-year-old kids. But it was over in a couple of weeks. And, but we all got our assignment. I had already applied for special duties. I applied for the Antarctic duty and the Antarctic. And I knew that if you applied for these special duties, once you did your year there, you could go anywhere in the world.
Otherwise, I would have like a very long thing, so I'm breaking it up. Can we go back to what you were saying? Go ahead. You were talking about Barry and you and being stationed there, but were you?
At that time, my applications, like I said, again, you don't realize you're being evaluated. And then our orders, after we graduated and we received our orders, I was not given the Antarctic duty, but I was given another assignment at a VX-5 experimental squadron at China Lake. I just saw China Lake. I didn't see anything else. I thought I was going to China. And I was quite excited. No, China Lake is in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The worst desert I've ever been, And, but actually, it turned out to be a blessing, because there were only 400 military sailors, about 600 Marines to guard, and then maybe 50,000 scientists, engineers. It was chemical, atomic, biological, Michelson laboratories and other experimental works development primarily. And I received my first security clearance. You couldn't go into the bases. So I had to do odd jobs around the base. Mostly I worked, which probably was the best training I received, around the enlisted men's club, the chief's club, and the officers' club. So I learned bartending pretty good. And actually, bartending helped me get through many crises and making additional money. When I needed money, I could, in fact, in the military, I was always asked to bartend at officers' parties and so forth. But I got my electronics school and my security clearance. And then later, because of whatever skills you have, and I also, sports is very important in the military, as it was in boot camp, the bases, especially the stations. And so usually the officers are your coaches. So I, of course, was still doing a lot of running. There was really no baseball, but it was primarily football. But I went out and I just wanted to work out with them, and they laughed at me because I only weighed like 150 pounds, 5'8", 180, and this teams included the blacks from Oakland, Hawaiians, and the biggest Samoan I had ever seen in my life. So I was upset at them laughing at me, but I stayed out. I worked out with them. It's not the first time I've been ridiculed. But when I saw them playing, I says, shit, I can run circles around these guys. And I went and I asked the coach, I want to play. And they of course all left again. But I went, they gave me pads that were too big and everything, and I had to run in my tennis shoes. And the first play, I took off, and that's all they saw. And we did it a couple of more times. In the end of the day, he gave me a sheet. I went into town, and they outfitted me with high school pads of tinker. I ended up playing first string offense and defense. It was a beautiful experience because of the people, the Hawaiians, especially the Samoan. And I played people, the players in New Mexico were not that big. The football players in Texas is a whole different story, but they were big. But the first time I hit that Samoan, you learn the difficult. Big, solid, almost don't move. You just learn to run around them. But being in sports really helped me. It helped me get along in the base, the education, the people that evaluated you, and the duty driving. Two things in the military that ultimately ended up and quickly ended up my childhood, I think, and it was the assassination of our president, John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy came to our base, and they gave him a big demonstration of the missiles and weapons that we were developing. We had top brass from all over them. I've never seen so many top military 707s at that place. My duty again was bartender, which ended up being, but President Kennedy, they gave us a special award for the work that we did. And in 6 weeks, he was assassinated. I was working at that time, I worked evenings. I was in charge of the avionics shop. And I was working with a man that had a moving and storage business. And I came out of the house, and this big 6'4" man was crumbled in the middle of the sidewalk crying. And it's an experience that is unbelievable when the military, when a president is, and I experienced that. We went immediately to the church, but the base became closed and they armed us. And until they swore in President Lyndon Johnson, no laughing. I don't think I've ever gotten over that. Then a little time later, Martin Luther King is assassinated in Memphis. And really, it makes you think and wonder and reflect on what your situation is there. And it was a very difficult time for us, but it changed me. And I became more determined. I came out of the military with a crypto top secret, and I worked in some of the top projects there. And Collins Radio from Newport Beach came. They wanted me to re-enlist, but Collins Radio came, gave me a job and paid for my education. And I went to live and work in Newport Beach, California. And I got my education. No, I think I've been to every junior college, Fullerton JC, I think every other major, mostly the electronics schools, because I was in electronics. And I was educated in vacuum tubes and transistors, micrologics. I helped bring that in. My first computer filled up three basements of buildings, And now, this little thing is more powerful than any other. The military, the veteran, the clearances that I got opened many doors for me. And my ability to work with different people, and mostly my military, I really ended up working with a lot of engineers and scientists. And it gave me a very good, strong background.
Can you expound more on how the military opened doors for you?
No, the clearances. The military and all of that, working with these top people and the weapons and the jobs that you do, the advancements. See, experimental projects that we're working at these laboratories are things that are going to be released in the future. They're advanced, and when you get that type of work dealing with that type of people, it's just your work ethic and how well you do. And but like everywhere you work, you're being evaluated. These engineers that came to work at these bases, they're also asked that. And that's probably somebody recommended. Yeah. But really, the clearances, just getting a clearance, there are very few people that get to that level. top secret, and then you get a crypto top secret.
Can you tell me more about how the military has, your military experience has benefited you now? I was hoping to get a soundbite like in the previous interview, you were talking about how you were able to go to college and your daughters and everything and moving to California and all that. Can you explain again so we can get that soundbite from before about how the military experience has benefited you?
No, well, I've already said that. The education that I got, the electronics education that I got, A, B, and C schools, in electronics and the type of work that I did, you were constantly upgrading. Things were being developed so fast you can't believe it. And I'm working with the top secret base of Michelson Laboratories. So all of that experience and the education that you're doing is just, if I knew nothing else and I had the security, you know how long it takes to get a security clearance and the amount of money the government. I had already worked my mother that the government was doing a security check. Cheryl just told you, his mother was a secretary in my high school. And these investigators from the government show up, wanted to know about my background. She calls my mother all worried. She says, there are men here. And my mom tells Lucy, don't worry. He told me that they're doing. So they check on me. I swear to God. And now that had already happened. But I'm saying it was how you behave and what you do in the military. Being a duty driver, wearing the braids, you're always with the top staff, the braid. And that's where your breaks come from. It doesn't come from the bottom, it comes from the top. Go.
Could you also?
My father and all these other men, they've already told you. When I got in boot camp, the first thing I did, I got in the back of the line, and I've never volunteered for anything, you know. Keep your hands down. It's all a game. And you know, you have to know where to stand. And I already had all that education as to how to behave and what to do. Keep your mouth shut and stay in the back. My problem is that because I had the GI Bill, and like I said, I went to the junior college and then got into the university. And my problem is that I had so much knowledge, especially about farm workers, integration, segregation, and I wanted to always raising my hand, trying to give input, and I almost flunked out because of that. And my advisor was from these mines. Danny Morales got his PhD at University of California. And he said, if you want that degree, you sit in the back, keep your mouth shut and your hand down. And that was the hardest part of listening to all this that happened to me. When it related about my people and our history, it was all wrong. And I was trying, no, they don't want to hear it. And that was the hardest. It was a bad experience for me, the university and the academics. And it's the same in books. Whatever I read, I was reading an Apache book. And the first paragraph, they were quoting the Manifest Destiny in an Apache history book.
So I need to stop this again.
Yeah.
Okay.
what's the word, no, it helped me, but it's, yeah. Uh, Grace? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I was waiting for you to talk. We've been recording all this time. We got minutes left.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, being Native American, and it's not that it wants, but people, certain people up there pick up on these particular traits, and I'm asked. And I have always, never mention that my grandfather raised me in ceremonial and traditional ways. And wherever I went, especially Sacramento, and I lived in Riverside where Sherman Institute for Indians were. But in China Lake, California, I told you that I worked everywhere, and I was so close. The Utes and the Paiutes, I met, socialized, and the medicine man selected me and indoctrinated me in the INIPI, the Healing Purification Lodges. And ultimately, that was probably the best experience, and that's what motivates me and drives me now. Is I've always been drug-free, alcohol-free, and every day of my life, I've run marathons and played baseball into my 50s.
So forgive me if I'm making an assumption. When you met some of the Paiutes, you had mentioned earlier that you know some of the ghost dance songs. Did you learn those from the Paiutes or from others?
I'm sorry?
The ghost dance songs?
Did you learn the ghost dance songs from Paiutes
No.
or others?
No. The thing is, I lack that particular quality. And I am more of a warrior, a facilitator, what I have been doing. And that's what I see here is the piercing of my ears. It's not that. It's that I'm used as a mediator, because I live in both worlds. And they felt they could trust me. And I'm the one that went out and facilitated and did that. Yes, they indoctrinated me in the ceremonies. But the first thing is the special ceremonies the Lakotas did. The elders. And once they accepted me and they said they would help me if I became a sun dancer, then the elders took me. And this is an initiation to remind me that every time that I am an honored guest, and I will change nothing and take nothing away. I have a purpose with these people, and that's what I've been doing. I facilitated around the world. I function. When they can't find guys with clearances or people that want to go, then I'm called.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Being a ceremonial person and being a gourd dancer, an elder of that has been my true blessing. And that's what drives me now, is being a historian, a native historian, a ceremonial person. And this is why I'm involved in Fort Beard. And I'm bringing, there's so many stories out here. There's so many other elders that need to be told. And Fort Beard is one of the most sacred places in this world. And I'm excited that the people from the Native American Legacy Program have adopted it. There's many, many stories. That's why I bring my friend here. Everybody that I have met, that you have met, You saw my gathering, the drum, the people, the elders that came, in a good way. That in alone would explain, how I'm perceived. I dress like this when I travel. I've never paid for a motel room in Europe, Bosnia, Australia, New Zealand. Wherever I go, the native people are waiting for me. And I work with them. I have brothers. Who's been to Tasmania? In prayer, in ceremony, Hawaii. And the same. I brought people who have actually completed their 4 years of Sundance here. So facilitates spiritual unity gatherings. And that has been the main lesson that I got in the spirit of unity and oneness. Oh, mitaki oase, we are all one. We're all related. That's what I learned.
Final question. How would you perceive, as far as how you, what is your purpose in this world? Of all the things that you're doing, what is your purpose in this world?
The spirit of unity and oneness.
I'm sorry, one more time?
Is promoting spiritual unity and oneness, trying to understand and setting and recording the true stories, the education of how things really are. Teaching our children of the original instructions. Who knows what we were here? The Native Americans have a special way of presenting it. We have to include them. And their teachings are incredible. The natural laws, the spiritual laws of nature. I've been trying to get the truth and seeking. I'm an incredible researcher. And thanks to the computers and Google, I don't have elders to go to anymore. But I've had to learn languages one word at a time. And the ancient ones did here. The Toltecas, the Olmecas, all the sacred altars. We live here where there are macaw parrots, 5,000 that came 5,000 miles. The sacredness of Casa Grandes, the biggest pueblo in the Southwest, is south, not north of us. The trade routes that came through this area, north and south, east and west. The knowledge that the stars are our guides. What's up above is down below. How many times we have gone to Palomas and the Three Sisters. The other day it struck me like a bolt of lightning. That's the Orion Belt. The Three Sisters. They're guides.
It's above Subilo.
All of our knowledge has been destroyed. And the only records that we have are what's written in these pictures, in these walls. What's drawn in the pottery of the Membreños. The migrations, this was the heart of the migration, the Exodus Mundi. If I take you to my place and you look at the North Star, at the Big Dipper, that's the seventh macaw. The Mayans knew that. All these migration, they came from this, here in Santa Rita de Cobre. Copper is more valuable than gold. They came for the copper, which they could just pick up off the ground. And this not only went to Mexico City, it went on into Yucatan. I have rescued artifacts, conch shells this big in the Hachita Mountains. We had quite a significant culture at that time. But the migration, the story of the migration is not from the north, south, but from the south, north also. It's a continuation. But there's another, they've never asked the local people here to go to the sacred site. All of this I learned by word of mouth and going to the natives. Events that the Hopis, what they have taught me. The Hopis living up by the Grand Canyon, they're from Palenque, Mexico, in Mayan country. And they make pilgrimage to this day. In the bedrock of the Hopi mesas, they've worn paths into the bedrock. How many generations, how many footprints? These are the prints that I have. Everything that I wear is on the mission that I am, of the spiritual migration. They came in prayer. That's why I carry a staff and I carry my medicine bag. This is my authority, my guide, the 4 directions. And I teach.
So we have a minute left.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to wrap up in a minute time?
No, really, I thank everybody. I wish there is a continuation. I'm not the story. I'm the one that can put it together, but there's many other elders that you need to do that. You have to know of how we maintain the last of the native elders, the Bronco Apaches, and how they say the salt of the earth. There were many historians at this event last weekend. It was very profound. We had good people. Hopefully they'll come and they'll talk to, we're the last. If you do not capture this, and I ask, and that's what I'm asking the youth, is to come in here and let us show you the sacred sites. It's taken me a lifetime to obtain the knowledge that I have. Sorry.
Do you have any other questions? Okay. So if you have nothing else to add, I have to, we're seconds away from.
That's been given to me in a very good way. And that staff, when you see me and Tom photographs, I never talk about a site that I haven't personally been there. Because you have to stand there. And basically, anywhere you go, in anything that I've done, I've survived because I knew who to stand with. Sometimes I stood with the whites in the South. Sometimes I helped the black. At that moment, you have to have those skills. And being here, in the 6th grade, the first Anglo guy broke my nose. 6th grade, because he couldn't keep up. And then they took me to his father, Dr. Woodworth, who put it back together. Fuck. I never touched another basketball in my life. I've been kicked out of so many goddamn places here. And then my father decides to buy a house in the Anglo side early. I thought he was nuts, but that's my father. I've seen our fathers, the contractors that come through from Texas, all bullshit. Remember, the bigger the hat, the bigger the bullshit. And then I've seen my father and Mr. Oh, God. He had the 2 boys on B Street. The one that went to prison.
Oh, Avilucea.
Mando. I saw my dad and Mr. Avilucea. I was looking for seat. I went to the 3 Aces bar to see if I could get a six-pack. And I opened the door and a body drops there, and my father is like this. And he looked up at, he grabs that Texan guy like this, and then he's, what the, in Spanish, "Chinga's kid." And then I saw Mr. Avilucia beat the shit out of these four contractors. My father, the instructions he told me, I hope none of this is for the press, but you personally never handled a matter. You came and you told my father, and my father, God damn, he was one crazy son of a bitch. His own foreman lived in the next block from us, and he was in a bad mood, and my father drove by in his truck, and Mr. Alexander didn't, not Mr., anyways, up the,
No recuerdo.
didn't give him the show off. My dad stopped the truck, got out, and I would just scoot him. Scolded the shit out of Bartlett, Mr. Bartlett. And, no, these are just personal things that fuck me. And then from then on, Mr. Bartlett, my dad would be walking to his truck, and